Welcome to tonight's workshop. My name is Alicia Smith, and I am the president of the Ontario branch of the International Dyslexia Association. And I'm joined here tonight by Joanne Bertrand, who is our vice president and our workshop chair committee, and also Kim Lockhart, who is volunteering with us on this series as well. She's been helping us behind the scenes, analyzing data and helping out with that sort of thing. So thank you for joining us tonight. It is a blustery day here where I am, and I know in many other parts of Ontario. And we have people joining us from right across the country. So thanks for tuning in. I think it's a nice thing to do on a rainy night is to get together and talk about literacy. So I hope everybody is excited about that as I am. So the agenda for tonight, I'll just go over. Oops.
I'm sorry. I have a Lenovo Yoga and all I have is the camera on the keyboard. So I got to figure this out.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our agenda for this evening, we're going to start with just a recap of the purpose of these workshops and go over a couple of common definitions. Then we're going to discuss some of the information that we have gathered so far throughout this workshop series. Then we will be having our panel discussion for tonight, and we were joined by a group of educators from Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board, which I'm very excited about that. Following that, we're going into our breakout rooms where you'll have a chance to connect with other educators and discuss some questions. And then finally, we'll return to the main session for our closing remarks, and we do again have some prizes. So if you can stick with us until the end, the workshop runs until 9 o'clock. If you're around for the end, you'll be entered into our prize draw. So the goal of this workshop series, just to recap, is to connect educators who are interested in learning about the science of reading and bringing evidence-based practices into their school. We are also here to celebrate your success and to discuss strategies for overcoming challenges so that we can share those with one another. And finally, throughout this workshop series, we are working to create a roadmap for educators who are interested in implementing practices aligned with the science of reading. And this is going to be a document that we will share with all of you at the conclusion of this series after our November session. It will be specific to the Ontario context, but there will be a lot of information in there that will be universal and would be applicable to anyone joining us from any part of Canada or really anywhere in the world. So we're very excited about that. In our first session, we decided to go over some common definitions, and we started with the definition of the science of reading. So we just wanted to ensure that everybody is on the same page for these discussions. The definition of the science of reading that we're using for the purpose of this series comes from whatisthescienceofreading.org. So in the last session, we went over that definition. I won't go over the whole thing again, but if you missed that, I do encourage you to visit whatisthescienceofreading.org and look through that. They have the defining guide that has a lot of different sections in it with quite a lot of detail. But in a nutshell, the science of reading is the entire body of scientific evidence that informs how reading develops and how we can best prevent reading difficulties and remediate reading difficulties when they do occur. So in this session, I wanted to discuss another common term that we're always using, and that term is structured literacy. So what is structured literacy? In a nutshell, structured literacy is an approach to instruction that is based on the findings of the science of reading. So within the definition of structured literacy, there are two sets of things that are defined. The first is what is taught, and the second set of things define how it is taught or how we teach those things. So what is taught in a structured literacy approach is language. So structured literacy teaches language at all levels, starting with sounds and spellings for those sounds, syllables, patterns and conventions of the writing system, meaningful parts of words, sentences, paragraphs, and then building to discourse. And this is all done through instruction in the following key areas: phoneme awareness, sound symbol correspondences or phonics, patterns and conventions of print, so orthography and spelling, morphology being the meaningful parts of words, prefixes and suffixes, roots and base words, syntax, understanding the parts of speech, grammar, and how words are used in sentences. And then, of course, semantics, which refers to comprehension of both oral and written language. And this, of course, is developed by teaching vocabulary and the interpretation of phrases and sentences and text organization. And of course, in a structured literacy approach, students are supported as they work with many different types of text, including stories and informational text, poetry, drama, etc. And before children can read independently, this often happens through read-alouds, carefully chosen read-alouds. But it's important to note that reading and listening to texts that stimulate deep thinking and build a solid foundation of background knowledge is an integral and key component of structured literacy. And I bring these up just to ensure that we understand when we're talking about structured literacy, we're talking about all of these things, and that these components are all taught throughout school, starting in kindergarten, but carrying on right all the way through into text. We do often tend to focus on the kindergarten and primary instruction, which is very important, but just to point out that much of this stuff is applicable to older students as well. And in a structured literacy approach, these things are all taught in a manner that is explicit, systematic and cumulative, hands-on, engaging and multimodal, and diagnostic and prescriptive. So this is, in a nutshell, the structured literacy approach. I encourage all of you, if you have not done so, to read the article that is pictured on this page, which compares the structured literacy approach to typical literacy practices. So we've included this article in the digital goodie bag, which we'll be putting a link in the chat to the digital goodie bag and sending that out in the follow-up as well. Additionally, there is an IDA fact sheet that defines structured literacy that we've also included in the goodie bag. Both of these documents are very clear, easy to understand documents that are wonderful to share with your colleagues so that you can have a common understanding of exactly what you're talking about when you're discussing structured literacy. So now moving into what we have discovered in this series so far. So last time I shared some little statistics about our registration process, who's registered and what you're seeing. And just to update you, we now have 821 people registered for this series, which is very exciting. And of the people who have registered from Ontario, the subset, we now have representatives, people joining us from 55 different school boards and First Nation education authorities. So that is amazing. I'm very glad to see that. The other good news is that most of you have mentioned that you've seen some form of positive change in literacy instruction in your board. Now, Kim, our volunteer who has joined us tonight, has gone through all 821 of the registration questionnaires and has categorized some of the positive changes that people are seeing in their boards. And she's amalgamated them and quantified them a little bit. And so we have sort of now a top 5 list of the 5 things that people are seeing and mentioned during the registration process that are happening in their school board. So we just wanted to go through that tonight in reverse order. So number 5, it was a very common thing that people mentioned, that they're now getting access to decodable books, or they're bringing those decodable books into their classrooms themselves, and that they're seeing an increased focus on primary phonics, teaching primary phonics, which is great. The 4th most popular category of things is increased interest and curiosity. So that was a wonderful thing to see. There were a lot of really good stories that were written in those intake questions about interesting conversations that are happening, and just a general curiosity, especially after the Ontario Human Rights Commission launched the Right to Read inquiry. It seems that has really piqued the interest of a lot of people. So that's great. Oops, wrong way. The 3rd most popular thing is that people are noticing that there's increased collaboration in their schools when it comes to literacy instruction. So this very much echoes what we saw in our panel discussion in the first session with our educators from Winston Churchill. They were talking about how studying the science of reading together has really brought them together as a group of teachers. We also read a lot of stories in the intake questions about people who have found increased collaboration across departments and school boards, which is great to see as well, breaking down silos, including having curriculum and special education come together to work on things, including speech language pathologists in the development and delivery of literacy professional development. And that sort of cross-team collaboration is fantastic to see. And I'm very excited because our panel for this evening has a lot of stories that really speak to that, which is amazing. The second most popular thing that was mentioned in the intake survey was new diagnostic assessment tools and professional development. A lot of these related to phonological awareness. So certainly David Kilpatrick was mentioned here a lot, as was bringing in early screeners for a variety of things. So that's great to hear. And then the most mentioned thing, most commonly mentioned sign of positive progress is the adoption of phonological awareness professional development, and in many cases, bringing in a phonological awareness curriculum. So in this one, Haggerty was mentioned very commonly. It seems that that is being picked up by schools right across the province. So I just wanted to share this. We'll be putting these sorts of bits of information into the roadmap when it is created. And it's really wonderful actually to read the stories that you wrote in. So thank you to everyone who took the time to really put some good information into that intake survey. It really helps us to get an idea of where people are at across the province, as well as the challenges that people are facing. So without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome our panel discussion for today. Today we are joined by a team of educators from Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board. So I first heard about the amazing things that are going on at Algonquin and Lakeshore last spring, when I had the pleasure of having a conversation with Sarah and Sandra, and they were so enthusiastic, and they had such wonderful stories of progress and coming together that I left that conversation just feeling so optimistic and so confident that it can be done. So I'm super excited to welcome them here today, and I'd like to first invite and introduce David DeSantis, the Director of Education for Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic, and I'd like to invite David to introduce his team. Welcome, David.
Hi, good evening. Can you see me online
Yes.
here? Okay, good. For some reason on my computer, I can't see you. So I can see you, but you can't see me. It's my pleasure to be here with you this evening. Just to give you a little bit of background about our wonderful board. We're kind of a mid to small school board amongst the 72 school boards across the province of Ontario. We have 32 elementary schools, 5 secondary schools, 5 Con Ed sites, roughly 2,000 employees and roughly 12,000 students. So from a raison d'etre standpoint, what is our why as a board? Our mission statement is that our board builds faith-filled learning communities where each member is loved, inspired, and successful. So it's from that root, that foundation, where we build our staff's capacity and we engage our students. So I'm sure we can all agree that reading is a fundamental skill that students must have to navigate their school experience and into their later lives. You just mentioned the Ontario Human Rights Commission. They announced a public inquiry into potential human rights issues that affect students with reading disabilities in Ontario's public education system. When I researched it a little bit, the inquiry is also assessing whether school boards use scientific, evidence-based approaches to meet students' right to read. The OHRC is assessing school boards against 5 benchmarks that are part of an effective, systematic approach to teaching all students to read, and that is universal design for learning, mandatory early screening, reading intervention programs, effective accommodation, and psychoeducational assessments. And I can proudly say on behalf of our team, we do all of that, and that's embraced in our MYSP, which is my next point. So we're now into the second year of our multi-year strategic plan. And where the science of reading falls into, it falls into our third priority, which is achievement and innovation. The very first goal in the priority is to increase student confidence and proficiency in literacy, including second language learning and numeracy. The key driving action to achieve this goal is to execute a 5-year science of reading, or Reaching Every Reader professional learning plan, if you will. So we are very proud of our educators and administrators and the changes that we're making to align the literacy work and with the science of reading, and I'm proud of the organizational team. Now, our team is huge here in terms of how this has encompassed all our staff. I'll just give you a little example. This includes, but it's not limited to, all our academic members within our curriculum team, student services, as well as our clinical staff, such as speech language pathologists and psychologists, have been working very hard to support this huge culture shift in our schools. So with that, I'm very proud to introduce 3 members of our team tonight that are integral members in the execution of our 5-year science of reading plan, and that is Principal Sandra Fragoso and Lori McCaw and Sarah Cassidy, who are 2 of our outstanding special assignment teachers. So I'll pass it over to the ladies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us tonight. It really, I know, means a lot to your team. I heard that you open up a lot of the professional development sessions that have been happening virtually, and I know that they really appreciate that. That was one of the first things they mentioned to me when we were talking, was how you open those sessions and you reiterate the goals of the board, why this is important, and really make everybody feel supported. So thank you so much for everything you've done and for joining us tonight.
Well, I really appreciate that. I just want to end by saying that you could have the best plans in the world, but if you don't have the right people in the right place, your plan isn't going anywhere. And we have fantastic people in the right place. So very honored to be working with such a dedicated group, and it's very easy for me to do any introduction on behalf of our staff. So I will quietly sit in the background and listen and learn tonight, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. So welcome, Sarah and Lori and Sandra. I'm going to just start off the questions. Actually, before I start off the questions, I'm just going to ask you to each just briefly introduce yourselves. And actually, before I do that, let me stop sharing the screens. Maybe people can see you a bit better. There, now I can see you. Excellent. So if I could just ask you to each just briefly introduce yourselves and tell us, how you got excited about the science of reading in the first place. And I'll just start with you, Sarah, if that works.
Sure, great. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Cassidy, and I am a special assignment teacher for the board. I work with religious and family life education, equity, early years, self-regulation, and I'm coming from a background teaching everything from kindergarten to grade 6, and also having spent some time as special education resource teacher. And so my interest in the science of reading really started in the primary grades when I was asking some questions about some of the things that were going on, and then also really was a bit more consolidated when I was in the special education role, because I was wondering why students were coming to me in grade 4 who were able to read and meet the PM benchmark levels, but then they weren't able to spell. And so those were some of the questions that we've been having. And so we started looking for answers in our school. And then I took this role with the board, and I'm just really excited to be here. And all of this learning from each other and collaborating is really, really a beautiful thing.
Excellent. Thank you. And Lori, how did you maybe just introduce yourself and tell us how you came here?
Hi, I'm Lori McCaw. I'm also a special assignment teacher at Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic District School Board. I work primarily in the curriculum department with literacy and numeracy at the elementary level. But Sarah and I entered our roles at the same time, and we've made a concerted effort to build some collaboration between departments and make sure that our educators are getting the same message, no matter who it is that they're talking to from our offices. I spent most of my teaching career in the primary and junior grades. And again, like Sarah said, several years as a special education resource teacher. And I I'm not sure where to say my interest in the science of reading began, because I was doing bits and pieces in the classroom without knowing that that's what it was called. And then again, as a special education resource teacher in consultation with our board speech language pathologist, I was learning a lot about how to help build the skills of the students that I was seeing on my caseload. And again, at the time, I'm not sure that the science of reading was a term that we were all familiar with. It was, many, many years ago. But all of the bits and pieces that I now reflect upon that I was doing in that role fit exactly with all of the things you mentioned in the outset of this session. So it's been a long time, but I've only recently come to put that all together and realize that that's what we were doing.
Amazing. Thank you. And Sandra, if you just want to introduce yourself and tell us how you came to be a part of this team at Algonquin Lakeshore.
So I'm Sandra Fragoso, and I'm a third-year principal at St. Thomas More in Kingston. And I also have my teaching experience was in the primary junior grades. And then I did kindergarten, and I was also a special education teacher. And then while a special education teacher, I used to have lots of conversations with our board psychologists and about some of the students that were being assessed and some of the difficulties. And a lot of the reports were coming back in such a way that in the end, I felt like I could write the reports myself, and that it was always the same gap that I was seeing, right? And those were the conversations we were having. And it really was about, so, what are we going to do differently in our classrooms? And so I think when people were doing PMs and looking at books like that, we started to have conversations about decodable books and bringing decodable books back into a classroom. And how do we do that? And then when I became a kindergarten teacher, it just became so much more fluid and easy to do, taking that experience from spec ed and then using it in a classroom. And so now in my role as principal, it's helping the whole school move in that direction. And then when I heard that we were sort of looking at this as a board, I think I kind of begged and pleaded to get onto the committee. And so I was lucky enough to be able to do that and join at the board level.
That's amazing. Thanks. So Sarah, as David mentioned, your board has this 5-year science of reading, professional development and implementation plan. So I was just wondering if you could share with us sort of the backstory behind how that came about.
Sure. So some of the pieces have already been spoken about in the introduction, but I just want to make clear that it really was something that didn't happen overnight, because as Lori mentioned, there are people who are doing pockets of the science in all kinds of spaces, and people had some pieces and some people had all pieces. And we did have some literacy training, I think probably 15 to 20 years ago, I'm dating myself, that was really about the phonics and blending and some of those pieces. But then turnover in staff, especially in kindergarten and in special education, means some of that training was lost. Geographically, we also have some people on both sides of our board. So on one side of our board, we have access to collaboration, and some of our staff has taught at Saganaska, which is a demonstration school. So there are some resources there. And then on the other side of the board, there is a clinic that a lot of educators of their own on their summers and other things, they went and did training in the Orton Gillingham model. And so educators were getting bits and pieces on their own. And then there was some board training. It just wasn't really organized yet. And at the same time, as Sandra said, we were seeing the same recommendations over and over in school psychologist reports, but also in speech and language reports. So it wasn't just it was the speech and language pathologist who really kind of led this charge, as we'll talk about a little bit. But then we also had people in schools asking questions about why, if we're teaching kids to read, why isn't that transferring to their writing and their spelling? Because the way that we're teaching kids to read wasn't having that transfer to that writing and that spelling piece. So all of these conversations were going on in silos to some extent initially, and then early years in curriculum and speech and language pathologists, we developed a pilot plan to start to look at new assessment tools. So I love that slide that said that that was one of the biggest things that's going on across the province, because it's really speaks to the need that we saw, which was that the diagnostic tools we were using were not giving us the information that we needed. And so the plan that started to develop really came out of what we were seeing in our board with all of these pieces. So all of these conversations were happening with a backdrop of the right to read inquiry. However, the focus plan for our board really started to get organized. We have an amazing curriculum coordinator, Maureen, and she realized that she was having parts of the same conversation with different people in different departments all across the board. And so she organized us all together, because she's great to organize us all together. And then we started this group with superintendents from early years and from student services and from curriculum. And there were school psychologists, and there were speech and language paths, and there were special assignment teachers. And so this became a part of the team. And then we realized that we actually needed people who were in the buildings doing the work. And so our group started to include school administrators like Sandra, and yes, she did beg. And it also included just, educators who were working in the schools and special education resource teachers. So I think that the backdrop of this is that it was just the perfect combination of the right people at the right time. And the goal of our senior team is really to break down those barriers and silos and to help everybody understand how all of these pieces fit together to support our students and families. And so our group initially started looking at how we have to figure out how all of our roles fit. So centrally, what does that mean? What does it mean for my work, or for Lori's work, or for the speech and language path? Because we weren't necessarily intersecting. And then once we figured out all of those pieces, then we started to focus on how we could start to deliver this information and this PD in small chunks to our system that didn't overwhelm teachers, and that also built on some of the really great things that they were already doing, even though they didn't know what it was called. So Lori's discussion about the science of reading, not knowing what it was, but she was doing all the things. That's true for a lot of educators. So we also didn't want to overwhelm people and say, you've been doing it all wrong, because people have been doing great things. But they also then started to learn that there were pieces that they were missing. And so the speech and language pathologist really took the lead on creating the rollout plan. And then the greater team of everyone that I mentioned before worked together in collaboration about the best way to deliver it in ways that would make sense and be relevant for people in schools. And I think that anybody who's in education would attest to the fact that the last 2 years have not been the ideal time to plan board-wide PD for anything, for all kinds of barriers. But we really do see that this is an equity issue first and foremost. And so even though there were all kinds of barriers that presented itself, every department really did whatever we could to make this happen, because the moral imperative is that our kids can't wait. Yes. And so I think it's still a journey, and nothing is perfect, and there are still barriers, but that's the backdrop of how the plan has started. And it is still a working plan. We'll revisit it every year and see where we're at, because barriers will come up. And so that's the backdrop.
That's amazing. Thank you. I love that you mentioned both in terms of bringing people together, putting all the people together in the same place so that you could really figure out how you can collaborate and where everyone fits, but also talking about putting all of the pieces of instruction together, because as you said, that there are lots of good things that are happening, but it's putting those pieces together and then filling in the gaps where they need to be filled in. So it's really both bringing the people together and bringing all of the pieces together. And I love that that you didn't let the pandemic daunt you, that you did go charge ahead and go ahead with your plan, which could not have been an easy thing to do. And I'd like to ask Lori about that, because I know, Lori, you helped to plan a lot of that professional development. And maybe you can tell us what that PD looked like and how you managed to do that during a pandemic.
So we sort of kicked it off with 2 days of virtual learning with Dr. David Kilpatrick in August of 2020. So of course, this was voluntary, being in the summertime. It was open to early childhood educators, classroom teachers, school administrators, CERTs, board level staff, anybody who was interested. We had huge uptake in people who attended those sessions. And then, as Sarah mentioned, we had some conversation about, like, are we really going to go forward with this? In September of 2020, when like everything was up in the air, we didn't even know what school was going to look like. It was like, are we going to do it? We decided that we did need to do it, despite the barriers, that we could, as a team, come together and find some creative ways to make it happen. So, the largest barrier was that there were no conditions to release educators to do professional learning last year at all. So the first thing that we did to get creative was as a multidisciplinary team, we started building what we call the notebook for newbies. So within Microsoft OneNote, we worked together to put some resources in there for educators that are based on current research. We included videos, articles, web links for educators to read and or watch to help establish the facts behind how kids actually learn to read. And the sequence of presentation in the notebook was arranged for gentle, self-directed learning, but we also invited educators to read or watch in their own preferred order based on the kids that they were working with in their classroom or their own personal interests. And then in terms of our year one plan, we had decided and broken it down into 4 different learning sessions. So the first session focusing on what is reading, so the simple view, decoding, comprehension, and orthographic mapping. The second session was focused on phonological and phonemic awareness. The third about assessment of phonological and phonemic awareness. And the fourth focusing on intervention in those areas. So we wanted to go through with it. We didn't want to put the whole plan on hold. So we decided that we would offer those 4 sessions virtually, sort of like in an evening learning series format. So that meant, of course, that those sessions, attendance at those sessions would be voluntary because it's outside of the working day. But we thought that we had enough excitement and interest from Dr. Kilpatrick's work and the questions that people were sending to us that we would get enough people to attend those sessions on their own time. And we did. We were quite pleased with attendance. So we distributed links to our sessions board wide, and we also agreed as a team that we would record those sessions so that they would be available to educators who, for whatever reason, couldn't attend on that specific live day. And also, we found a benefit of that was that many people have reported watching those recorded sessions more than once. They've gone back along their journey to relook at certain parts or refresh their thinking in particular areas. So that just ended up being a bonus. So we did that for the first session. We had great attendance. We were happy with the questions that were asked and the way that went. So we replicated that process for the second and third learning sessions. When it came time for our 4th session, though, we were feeling, another little barrier was sort of some tensions around, our educators feeling like there was a lot of after school things happening and people starting to feel like pressure to attend these and a little bit of anger and tension around having to do that all the time because, they were online all day teaching their kids. So to join in on another computer session was a lot. So as a team, we met again and we decided for a 4th session that we wouldn't actually offer it live. We would pre-record the parts, My lovely daughter edited them together all nicely for us, and we posted them for our educators so that they could watch them, on a prep time or at a lunch and learn or on their own time when they felt comfortable. So again, we sent the link out to the system for that one. And also, as all of this is taking place, our speech and language pathologists at Algonquin Lakeshore offered job-embedded training for special education resource teachers on the PAST tool from Dr. Kilpatrick's book. And also concurrently, Sarah and I offered training for early childhood educators and classroom teachers on the PAST screening tool during the school day, with a lot of support from very creative school leaders who found ways to give their educators enough time to meet with us and do that training with fidelity. It truly was a team effort there. And after all of this, we made available supporting resources such as Dr. Kilpatrick's book, Weber boxes, soundbite card rings, in order to help educators have what they need at their fingertips to provide the intervention and teaching opportunities that their students needed based on their data. And then in order to keep track of all of these things, we also created a Microsoft team called Reaching Every Reader Educator Resources. And that team is where we house our notebook for newbies, all of our recorded sessions, our 5-year plan, all of the slides that we have used, information and links to the past and the past. We have sections on how this will work in French language classrooms, frequently asked questions document that our team regularly visits and updates answers, and other resources that support the work. And our team now includes 276 people who work in a variety of roles across ALCDSB, and we have new requests to join daily. And we know people are using it based on the questions and information that they give us when they reach out. So it's worked so far. And that's how we creatively delved into year one, despite a quick change to our plans due to the pandemic.
That's amazing. It's amazing how you pivoted that way, and you continued to adjust your plan throughout the year to adjust to the changing circumstances. And it sounds like you've created a really amazing set of resources there, the way that you did that by putting those videos together and organizing them in one place so people can go. I saw a comment in the chat that the videos were amazing and very helpful and great to go back to. And I should have said to everyone as well that if you have questions for our panelists tonight, you can put those in the chat and we can ask those at the end of the discussion. So the next question I wanted to ask is for you, Sandra, as a principal. I know that principals also had special PD, and I was wondering if you could speak to that, and then maybe also tell us a little bit about how it's going in your school.
So so in August, there was professional development for all administrators, and it was an opportunity to do some of the instruction and some of the learning that had been already offered to staff in the general, more of a general format, and then also provide the administrators with gearing it towards what to look for in the classroom and then how to support their staff as they're working through this. So things like they created, the team created school leaders tools. And so if a staff member asks a question, such as if they're stuck on something, such as what assessments do I do or how do I do it? So then the administrator would be given sort of a prompt as to where they could find the information that they're looking for to help support that staff member, and things that do align with the science of reading, so that we were all on the same track. It was really well received. A lot of our administrators don't necessarily come with primary or special ed qualifications, right? So it really was just an opportunity for them to be able to get on board and to see where we're headed and what are the supports that they need as well to help them be able to lead this. And at our school, so the last couple of years, it was great. So I sort of came in and was able to sort of speak to what our multi-year strategic plan said and what it talked about the science of reading, and how our little ship at St. Thomas More was going to be headed in the same direction as the big ship. And really, though, it was really about looking at our students and knowing that some of them are struggling to learn to read. And so we were going to use the most recent knowledge and information that we had to help those students along. So I found here that people really appreciated that, and knowing that we were all going to work in community. So we were all going to work together, and we were providing the resources that they needed. So it was, you can put those other things aside. This is what we're going to use, because this is, what the data is showing that we need to do. And then we did exactly that. Then we started to get some of the data and see where our holes were. Again, our special assignment teachers were available to us, so they could come in. A lot of staff offered up their lunch hour to sit and, in our case, it was with Sarah, but to sit and talk and to look at that data, and then be able to break things up into smaller parts so that we could achieve those goals. But we really committed to high, like sort of a high standard of, this is the expectation when kids leave kindergarten, this is what we're looking for, and we're going to reach it. So, there's it's what do you need from me to get there, but we're going to do it. So, people felt some pressure to do that, but nobody disagreed that they all wanted kids to learn. And so this is what we need to do. This year, my whole team has changed roles, and some have gone to different schools. So I feel that we are at St. Thomas More working back at year one, and that's okay, right? So we're back to year one, and we've already met with the kindergarten team, ECEs and classroom teacher, and our special education teacher. And we've sat down and we've started that conversation. We've reviewed where they can find the information in the notebook for newbies. And they're going to go back and do some of that reading on their own, watching some of the videos and coming back with some of their own questions. And then we've also, I had a conversation the other day with our grade 3 teacher, and what does science of reading look like for him in grade 3? And where is he, and what does he need from me? So that's sort of how it's more of an individualized, who needs what, and we're taking them from where they're at and moving them forward.
That's great. And I love that you mentioned the data. I know that data-driven decision-making is a big part of your plan and the assessment tools that you've been rolling out. When we spoke earlier, I know, Lori, you were talking about the impact that having that data has made on teachers. I think, Sarah, you mentioned that as well. Wonder if you could just share with us two things. What is the type of data that you're collecting, and what is the impact that that's had on the teaching?
So for year one, our focus was on collecting data using the PASS assessment and also the PAST assessment. So I'll speak mostly about the PASS, because PAST has been something that our special education resource teachers are using for the most part, and our classroom teachers and early childhood educators are using the PASS in kindergarten. So as I mentioned earlier, Sarah and I were able to move around through the board last year upon request to offer training to groups of teachers and individual teachers and educators and ECEs on the PASS. So we during training, went through that tool thoroughly, went over all of the categories, what they mean, why they're important, how to actually administer it. We practiced together, then the educators would try on their own until they were comfortable. And then we realized that, we had made them a chart on paper and they were filling it in, and it was kind of hard to look at and see patterns. So we hopped into Excel and we created a self-coloring Excel spreadsheet, so that when educators were collecting their data, they could, instead of putting it on paper, input it into Excel. And we set up the spreadsheet so that if the children scored in particular intervals, it would color code itself to green if they were applying that skill, yellow if it was kind of there but practice was required, and red if they needed instruction. And the color was a game changer, because you can then look down the columns for each skill and literally see, like, my class as a whole has this skill, or, you know, here's a little small group of students who need some support with that skill, or oh boy, you know, in this class we have a lot of people who are red, so we need to do some whole group instruction with this skill. So working with educators then, you know, as a follow-up, we would come in when the profile was complete and support educators as they looked at their data, analyzed their data, and used it for planning purposes. So we would do that in collaboration with educators, again, as requested. And what we saw after working with educators to make a plan based on their data, and, you know, having them set some goals for, you know, for the next 4 weeks or 6 weeks, I'm going to work on this skill because it's what the data says I need to do. You know, the next time we're in the building, or even before we get back, we would have people sending us screenshots of their updated Excel documents, or literally like dancing down the hall when we were in the building to show us the green, because the work that the targeted work that they had done based on their data, they had seen that the children had mastered those skills and were able to turn them green in their chart. And the educators were proud of their students' growth and recognized, I feel, that they had the work that they did had a direct impact on students, and they could see that in a concrete way. And so what that means is that their sense of efficacy around this has increased, and they knew that they could have a direct impact on student achievement. And so we know from the work around self-efficacy that, you know, having a high sense of self-efficacy leads educators to continue doing whatever that work is, because they can see their impact. And so you know, that then increases buy-in, that makes an educator talk to other people in their building who maybe didn't try that yet, and say, like look, like this happened. I collected this data, I did this plan for 4 weeks, and like my kids, like they've moved, they have the skill. And so then you get other people interested. So I think that like, I can't help smiling when I tell the stories, because I just have memories of certain individuals, right, who were just so, like, they've not maybe necessarily had such a concrete example of I intentionally teach, and I can honestly say that it worked. Like, it was beautiful. So, like, time and time and time again across the board. And I just can't say enough about how that's a game changer for educators.
That's amazing. I love that you brought up that sense of self-efficacy for teachers. And I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the work of John Hattie, where he found that teacher collective efficacy, so the belief that in a building, the teachers can work together to make a difference for students, was a bigger predictor of student success than socioeconomic factors, home environment, lots of other things that we know are very difficult to combat. But knowing that, having that high sense of efficacy and personal belief that you can do it makes such a huge difference.
And I think, like, that's really what's informing our work in year 2 now, is that, like, in many places it was just one person or one educator team, and it slowly grew and expanded. And our goal right now is to build that sense of collective efficacy, that, like, in this building, when we work, like Sandra was saying, in this building, when we work together and we have a cohesive vision and plan, we can make change for kids.
That's amazing. And Sarah, it looked like you wanted to jump in there and say something about that as well.
I was just going to add to that piece of it. It's a really fine line between overwhelming educators in this work with all of the other things that they that they have going on, inside of school, outside of school, trying to figure out learner profiles and working on all of the different pieces. And so I think that the power of when I look at a data sheet and I see it as a whole of all of the skills that kids need to have, if I'm looking at a K-2 continuum, it's overwhelming. And so the other really critical piece of this process is that when you sit down and if you involve administrators in this process, and then the administrators are there to say, okay, let's look at this and let's break it into doable chunks, because otherwise it turns into multiple groups of all of these things going on, and I'm trying to meet all of the different needs. But if we can break it down and think, okay, what is whole group? What is small group? Who needs that more focused one-on-one intervention? And then having the principal at the table for that discussion means that's also the discussion that happens about, okay, what resources do I need to order you? Are you good? What do you already have? How can we use the people power in our building to be creative to make sure that the kids who on our data sheet we're really quite concerned about, because they're missing a lot of skills, that they get seen multiple times a day to really focus on that piece. And I think that this is part of the piece of this, the teacher efficacy, is that all of a sudden they come in and there's this fear about the word data, that we also notice that too. Bring your data, and everyone's like, what are you going to do with the data? And then they bring it and we're like, okay, this data is great. Now you know exactly what your whole group lesson is, but you know exactly what your small group, this is so exciting. You know exactly what to do from now until Christmas. And they're like, oh, that's great. And then they come back after Christmas and I'm like, okay, look at you, your data has completely changed. Now what's your new goal? So it's continued checking in. And including the instructional leader, the principal, as part of that conversation, as part of that process, is really critical, because then they can say, okay, just tell me what the resources are, and they can start to get the barriers out of the way for the educators and the educator team so that they can do the work they need to do.
Thanks. That's fantastic. And I just wanted to, we've got some questions in the chat and we want to move into those breakout rooms pretty soon. But I just wanted to quickly ask Sandra one thing. In our discussion before, you had all mentioned a resource, I think maybe that Lori provided to principals, the red flags, green flags document. And I just, maybe if Sandra or Lori wanted to just speak to that very briefly. I did include the copy of that in the digital goodie bags that everybody will get the link to tomorrow. But if you could just maybe explain what that is. Either one of you, Sandra or Lori or Sarah, anyone.
So I think I sent you, Alicia, the green flags from the Reading League. And that was what we started our conversation with. So then I'll let Sandra and Lori take over, because I sent that to you and I forgot to tell them that I did that. We're such good collaborators that I just assumed they'd read my mind. And so then they took that as our baseline and we personalized it for ourselves, because I think that's the other really important piece. Our plan might not work for you in your board. And so I'll stop talking now.
You don't ever have to stop talking. Sandra, I don't know if you want to talk about this or if you want me to start, you can jump in. So yeah, like as Sarah mentioned, we took the document from the Reading League. We had encountered it in some of our learning, and we really liked I'm not a school leader, but the school leaders in our team really quite liked the idea of the green flags and the red flags. So green flags are things you would see that indicate that the practice that the educator is engaging in is in line with the science of reading, and then red flags would be indicators that whatever they're doing is not necessarily in line with the science of reading. A great place to start asking some more questions, right? So, but we weren't like, we loved the concept, but not everything in there seemed to fit what we were seeing in our schools. So we really wanted to personalize it and add some more pieces. So we sort of went with the style of green flags and red flags, and then we integrated in, like, for the school leaders, as Sandra mentioned, who may not have that primary or kindergarten background, or who are just, in the beginning of the learning about this themselves, we wanted to build in, like, the green flags are fine, but the red flags, we wanted to build in, like, if you're seeing this practice in the classroom, what kinds of questions can you ask that educator to give that gentle, nudge or open the conversation about what they're doing and why, and then how to sort of steer them toward a better alternative that's in line with the science of reading. So we spent a lot of time, months and months and months, refining this tool and getting input from school leaders across, like in our whole team, to make sure that it was something that that they could have on their desk when an educator is bringing them their class profile, to help with some guiding questions and some look-fors for when they're in classrooms, visiting, watching, and seeing what's going down. And again, everything's coming from that. All of our lines of questioning and look-fors are coming from that gentle, perspective. Like we don't want our school leaders to be like, why are you doing this? This is a red flag. Like we said, if you're seeing green flags, like you want to talk those things up with your educators. And if you're seeing the red flags, you're not going, this is a red flag and this is a red flag and this is a red flag, right? Like it's helping them to see how to approach those red flags with like a gentle nudge and support, rather than an accusation about why are you still doing this. So
Yeah.
we were very careful to craft language. That's
Sure.
And I would just add too that it's not like necessarily just the administrator, because the in your school team you definitely have teacher leaders. And so it's about, pairing up with them and working with those teacher leaders who often, sometimes teachers are less intimidated to have a colleague come in than their school administrator, right? Hopefully not, but if that's the case, it's how do you pair up people or with your special education teacher to make things happen, and to move things along using the green flags.
And I think it's so important to help people understand how to approach those conversations in a kind and caring way, so that you can, build the trust and buy-in instead of having people retreat and dig in their heels. So that is definitely, it's great to see that you're providing people with that language and those tools so that they're prepared to do that. So I want to thank all of you for this. We could just continue this discussion, I think, all night, but we do want to get everybody into the breakout rooms. Joanne, I know you had written down some questions and collated them a little bit. Did you want to jump in and ask those questions, or?
Well, yes, because we have more people watching, we did discuss them a bit during the breakout rooms, but I'll repeat. And we were being asked whether the recordings that you created in the training of your board members could be shared. And I know you mentioned about permissions, but a lot of people are also asking about the notebook for newbies, whether that would be shared.
So I feel like the notebook for newbies is easier to share. The issue is that when we did these training sessions, we did ask educators and educator teams to be brave and courageous and promise them that these video recordings, because it's actually them in classrooms, and they're not perfect and they're still learning, and all of that is okay. But we did kind of promise them that we would keep it just to our system. And there's also children in these video recordings because it's taken in a classroom. So sharing the video recordings is a little tougher. But the notebook for newbies, I think, would be fine to share.
Okay, thank you. Well, we will perhaps be able to share it on our website, right, Alicia? Wouldn't that be terrific?
Or if you're willing to provide us the link to it, we could send it out in the follow-up email to this session.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. That'd be great.
That would be excellent. Just a short statement. During the breakout room, it was said that no teacher would ever object to improving their practice to have their children succeed in learning to read. However, we are with a curriculum that asks that we teach the 3 cueing system. Could you describe perhaps how you talk about human rights versus curriculum? Yeah.
Are you
Sarah,
okay
you
if
had
I-
mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Really just that, one of the questions that came up was around curriculum, and you have to follow the curriculum and the 3 queuing system. And that is in there, but there in the front matter, there's also other pieces, and there is reference to decoding. And so the question was, when we're talking about structured literacy, there is the what we have to teach, but there's also the how we have to teach. And so that how we have to teach in our system is aligned with that, and that the human rights piece and the right to read really kind of trumps that curriculum. So if it's not to say that we're not following the curriculum, because we are. It's just that the pieces and the how that we teach kids to read, and really keeping that focus on, the 15 to 20%, although I think it's actually more, it's a higher number now, that are not getting it, that we are planning for them first as a human right issue. And then all of the other pieces for students who would honestly learn to read in spite of us, because there's language rich environments and some kids just figure it out and pick it up. But when we're thinking about student-centered learning in UDL, we really are focusing on who are the kids who are most vulnerable and how do we get them what they need first. And so planning with them in mind, because teaching the science of reading hurts no one. There's no one who's like suffering because of this. It just means that we're really focusing on the how of that piece first. And the other piece that was kind of mentioned about the 3 queuing system, the language that we've shifted to is that we are, in our board, we're talking about, we teach kids to read, not to guess. And so we call the 3 queuing system guessing behaviors, and we're not teaching kids to guess, we're teaching them to read. And so that's another piece as well, that it really is just about the language that we're using. So if I'm telling you to look at the picture, and if I'm telling you to look at the first sound and something else, that's guessing. So let's be really clear about our language in terms of what we're trying to help kids. We want them to read and write. We don't want them to guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we did have a specific question. What does it look like in the classroom when you have a teacher in training who's implementing this new practice of the science of reading in her kindergarten classroom or grade 1? What does it look like? What is she doing, or he? Because we have a teacher who wants to start.
So our first stop is getting some information. So that pass assessment,
right,
finding out which skills individual students and the group of students have in place, which skills need some more practice, and which skills need some direct instruction. That's the first piece of the puzzle for us is where are they? Where are these kids? What do they have? What do they need? And once that's there, it becomes very clear what the work is. So what the work is, again, with the whole group, with small groups, and for individual students. So you could pick up Heggerty and just do everything, but that takes a lot more time, and it's not necessarily as focused or intentional. It'll do something good. So if you're really nervous, go ahead and try something like that. But if you have your data, it just becomes easier to really hone in on exactly where and what the kids need, instead of spending time on skills that they already have established. So, collect some data, try it, and like our team, we know that you can do some things on your own, but when you work with someone else, that support of having another person who could be in the same place as you, just starting out, or could be further along the journey, there's nothing like sitting down with another person to look at some student information and say, what is this telling me? This is what I think it's telling me. Do you think it's telling me the same thing or something different? having those professional conversations and building each other up and saying, okay, like I'm seeing this and you're seeing something similar. What could we do? And using some of the resources that are out there, on our board, as I said, we have some people using Haggerty. We have the Kilpatrick book. We have the sound bites cards, the Weber boxes, and tons of activities from the past that are like the past in our board, from our previous tool that still stand, and help educators to work on those skills with their students. Like, start with your kids, I guess, is what I'm trying to say in a nutshell. Start with your kids, like find out what they have and what they need, and make a plan, and personally set a length of time that you're going to work on it, and check in. And if it worked, you're on to something. If it didn't work, then what else could you try? And for me, I mean, that's how I roll personally. Like, we're all we're going to do if something doesn't work is we're going to learn something. So that's the worst case scenario, is that we learn something doesn't work and we try something else. So don't be afraid. It is we've worked with numerous people, and it's scary, and this isn't what we were taught, and it isn't what we have experience with. But the people in this group seem like they're ready and they're willing. So get some data and give it a whirl. And there's excellent resources at IDA Ontario. Like, pick one and try it, see what happens.
And I would add to that as well, is just thinking about your day and where is it within your day that things can naturally be embedded. So if you're playing music, are you being intentional about the songs that you're picking? So, in a kindergarten room, are you playing Raffi? Is there things like that can help just build some of those skills for some of those kids, that it's just lack of exposure that will sort of catch them up and bring them where they need to go. And those are great opportunities to do that. What's your lineup routine? Are you embedding some of these skills into the natural flow of your day? When kids are sitting and eating and are you giving them opportunities to practice some of those skills in fun game wise? Again, if you know your data, that's great, because then you can focus your questions on that. But just that exposure, all the different times throughout the day that you can provide them with it.
Because the other piece is that when we're talking about kindergarten, we always have to keep what is developmentally appropriate for kids in mind as well. And we have to incorporate movement and music and those self-regulation strategies that are kind of universal, and you can do it outside. And how are we building it into warm-ups in gym? And how are we building it into arts? And how are we incorporating it throughout the day? And how are we doing it, even though we're doing a beautiful, rich read aloud for another purpose, because we want kids to fall in love with reading? How are we pulling out some pieces with that when we're thinking aloud? How are we reading a rhyming book at the end of the day, or when there's a 5-minute and leaving out the end, or dismissing kids to wash their hands in COVID time by doing blending and segmenting phonemes. And so I think this is the other piece, that we're not sitting kindergarten kids or even grade 1 kids or grade 2 kids down for 40 minutes to do this. When I'm talking chalk and sock with phonics, code pack phonics, see it, say it, hear it, write it, even with all the transition times, that's 10 minutes. That's like, get your chalkboards out, put it away, all of that stuff. And there can be some explicit teaching around the phonemic awareness and the phonological awareness skills, absolutely. But those, exactly what Sandra said, how are we using those little transition times during the day, which can sometimes be turned into like a behavior management issue, because they're all, there's zippers and the snowsuits and everybody's at a different rate. Then they're not just waiting, they're still engaging in something, and you make it fun.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I think you answered quite a few of the questions that were in there. We covered the 3 queuing. We covered the kindergarten as well. There was a question in there about how you integrate this in with play-based kindergarten. So I think you answered that as well. There was also a
Mhm.
question about avoiding pendulum swings and how do we ensure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think you did speak to that a little bit, Sarah, but when we were in the breakout rooms, you talked about that a little bit more, about why we're focusing on some of the things we're focusing on. Maybe you could speak to that again.
Sure. I was just saying that I love that that was a question that came up, because absolutely the message has never been do away with like the love of reading. We want kids to love reading. That is like the thing. That's the reason why we do this work, so that they can access their own love of books that they love to read. The reason why we're focusing on this part of it is because this was what people were not coming to us with. They didn't learn this in teachers college or in early childhood educator programs. So these are the gaps that we had to fill in terms of staff learning, and not because it was ever their fault. And we made that really clear from the first one. You didn't learn this, so this isn't anybody's fault. It's just that the pre-service courses prepare people better for those, some of the read alouds and what to do and those other pieces. And so I think that piece is really, our message is not that we do away with those other rich texts or different writing, nonfiction, fiction. We do it all continually, and that works especially well in a play-based inquiry classroom. We're using nonfiction texts that we have on Epic and other things just to pull up in the moment. We're never going to let go of that love of reading, but this was the gap that we were seeing. And so people were also interpreting, and I think this was the question, the full day kindergarten program is play-based, so we have to let everybody discover everything. And that is a big part of the program, absolutely. And Sandra and I have both taught it, and we understand that piece of it. But in the curriculum document, there's also a section for free play, focus play, and directed teaching, and all of those are in the front matter, that front matter of that kindergarten curriculum. And so this is one of those opportunities where you're doing that focused, explicit teaching. You are also doing the noticing and naming when you're doing consolidation and those other things. You can still put the phonics in when you're, writing and drawing pictures of what you created in the play-based component, and noticing and naming the phonics throughout the entire day as part of that. But there still does need to be some explicit teaching about phonemes themselves, and then how to map them to the graphemes. So that explicit teaching is done, and then you reinforce it through the noticing and naming. And so for me, that's how I see those two pieces coming together really well.
That's amazing. So I think we're going to have to cut it off there. Thank you all so much for staying on and answering those questions. I know there were a lot of questions, and I do always feel with these discussions like we could go on all night. So I just want to thank you again for joining us and being a part of our panel discussion. It's really amazing to hear about what's going on in Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic and how you've all come together as a team. And it's so nice to see a board that has leadership and has brought everyone together and has managed to break down those silos for the good of the kids, because that's clearly, I think, everyone's goal for sure. So on that note, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Again, if I called your name for one of the prizes, please just email me with your address and I'll make sure that that gets mailed out this week. Thank you.